You're listening to We Ain't Dying for This, a Black woman's guide to liberation, and I'm your host, Crystle Johnson. We are a community of Black women demanding our collective liberation through radically soft living. Each week, we share the stories of Black women who have set themselves free from the expectations of others and are living on their own terms.
Hey, friends, and welcome to another episode of We Ain't Dying for This, a Black woman's guide to liberation. My name is Crystle Johnson, and I am your host. We took a little break last week. We needed a break. And now we're back to have a conversation about reclaiming fulfillment as liberation with one of my new friends, Dria James. Hey, Dria.
Hey, friend. How are you, Crystle?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for being here. For one who's never joined an episode, we like for these to be interactive. So hopefully those of you who are listening are able to kind of pop into the chat to tell us where you're listening in from. If you are hashtag team live or hashtag team replay. And then obviously we want you to share this live with a Black woman that you know that you think might benefit from this conversation about reclaiming fulfillment as liberation. And let me, just so everyone knows, sometimes LinkedIn is a little bit delayed. So if you are typing in and we're not responding, blame it on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn. Hey, Andrea in New York City. So I created this series, We Ain't Dying for This. Okay, we got someone from DC. Created We Ain't Dying for This because Black women are quite frankly dying. And we are dying under all of the stress that we're under to meet expectations, to be everything for everybody. And I think we often think about liberation as either you have liberation or you don't. But I created this series to highlight different Black women who are experiencing liberation in different ways, who are able to share more about their story and hopefully inspire other Black women to move towards liberation on their own journey in their own way. All right, we got some folks from Cali, from Raleigh, North Carolina. Yeah. So happy you're all here. All right, so let's get into it. So Dria, for the people that don't know who you are, girl, tell them who you are.
Who am I? Oh, goodness. So my name is Dria James. Nice to meet everyone and virtually be engaged with y'all. I am a seasoned people leader with over a decade of experience leading talent management and DEI. It's funny because Crystle and I were talking at the start of this, like when people ask, who are you? Do you lead with your title? Do you lead with, your personality traits? And one of the things that I mentioned to her, I was actually on a call earlier today, and as an icebreaker, the question was posed to us. If you were on a deserted island and needed to choose only 3 artists to have for that entire 1 year that you were on a deserted island, who would they be? And this needs to be 3 artists whose catalog you could listen to for the full year. And it was interesting because I think you learn a lot from people just off of that answer. So I'll start there. So if I had to pick 3 artists, the 3 that I would choose first would be Marvin Sapp. Okay. He's a gospel artist. The second, and Crystle, you and I didn't go through this. I got your 3, but you'll have to share your 3 for everyone. So the first would be Marvin Sapp. The second would be Lil Wayne. Don't judge me. And then the third would be probably Rick Ross. I know Chris Brown is also a little, controversial, but if we're talking catalogs, I'm sorry, it's extensive. So I would love to hear, just even in the chat, what some of y'all's picks would be. And Crystle, you got to share yours for the group. But long story short, I have been in HR for most of my career. I've been in DEI for most of my career. I started off at Goldman Sachs working in their human capital management division. Led various efforts to grow and support its diverse talent pipeline, made VP there after 6 years, left to join a management consulting firm called Bain & Company, where I led the firm's retention, development, and advancement efforts, starting off for its Black, Latinx, and Asian talent before being appointed as the firm's inaugural head of DEI for the Americas. And now I am the founder and CEO of Black and Diversity. And my personal mission is to inspire, equip, and empower forward-thinking leaders and organizations to thrive. So the way that I now typically really position myself is I'm a leadership coach, a workplace strategist and consultant, and a community builder who's dedicated to 1, cultivating inclusive and equitable ecosystems, 2, equipping leaders with tools to succeed both professionally and personally, and then 3, really trying to build a community of change agents who are advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the places where they live, work, and play.
I love it. And you got a lot of people in the chat.
Come on, chat. Okay.
Songs. We got people from Philly, DC,
yes,
LA, Portland. Also, I love beautiful chorus too. I've been listening to chorus. So I went to this play called The Black Feminist Guide to the Human Body like a few weeks ago. It's probably like a month at this point. And she mentioned that she had like a playlist on Apple Music. Well, she didn't say where, but she said it was a playlist. So I went like on Apple Music, like searching for Black feminist, and actually found this playlist. It was a Black feminist playlist, not hers, unfortunately. I'm gonna have to find it. But it had a lot of beautiful chorus, and I had actually never heard of beautiful chorus before. Have you?
I have not, but thank you, Andrea, for sharing that. I'll have to listen on the back end. I know when you shared your 3 artists, there was an artist that I had to add to my Apple Music. So I don't know if you want to go ahead and share your 3. I think you'll get some +1s.
Yes. So my artist that I would listen to, I want to listen to something like soothing. Although, like when you named yours, I'm like, well, maybe I would need like get it done. Yeah, I would need to turn up a little bit. That I chose before I knew yours are India Irie. I would choose Cleo Soul, and I would also choose Rhapsody. And Rhapsody was a new one for you, which I love. So if no one has heard of Rhapsody, please look her up. She has a song with Erykah Badu called 3 a.m. and I love it. I mean, it is a reminiscing sort of song, but it's really good.
Love it. See, Michael Jackson just popped in. We talked a little bit about that. I said, listen, do you want my 3 authentic, genuine responses or just what I think people want to hear? But you can't go wrong with MJ. There's no wrong answers here. I think you learn a lot about people, though, from who they choose.
You definitely do. Yeah, I'm over here like, I just want to live a soft life. So I'm just going to go with all the soft artists. You like, nah, give me some Wheezy.
Listen, for the people in the chat who know me, they are not surprised.
I love it so much. So we also talked a little bit about like how you grew. So like in your introduction just now, you talked a lot about work, but tell us more about your background, like how you grew up. How'd you get here?
Sure. So how did I get here? My early childhood experiences, I think, really led me to the career path of DEI. So just to take it all the way back, I grew up in an inner city neighborhood in New Jersey. Shout out to anyone from New Jersey who's in the chat or from Paterson more specifically. Both my parents were educators in the public school system in Paterson, but they made a deliberate choice to send my brother and I to private school. And that was largely just based off of the fact that they knew that there were not the amount of resources and opportunities that were available just in the public school setting in our town. And they wanted to, provide more opportunity for us educationally. So with that, I always lived in Paterson, but went to school in a totally different county in New Jersey, kind of traveled 30 minutes to and fro each day. And from a very early age, I got exposed to the stark contrast between those two worlds. I definitely had a lot of privileges in that academic setting that I was in. But when I would come back to my parents' schools, which they were very deliberate about taking me to their classrooms, you know, playing with students in fourth grade. When I was in fourth grade, my dad was a fourth grade teacher. And I would just see the difference between, you know, torn and weathered books that they had for recess, you know, going on asphalt parking lots as their playgrounds versus, you know, my school settings where we had multiple kind of plush, you know, almost like parks basically on this campus. And so through that experience, I became really interested in disparities that exist in our society, simply based on factors such as your zip code. And so I always, you know, really just took that experience to heart. I was very intentional, even when I was on that campus, about making sure that people saw my face as a tour guide. I wanted other families of color to see that people like me were there, thriving on the campus. And I would say in high school, I developed a real interest in business. I saw that both of my parents were in education, didn't frankly think that I had the patience to be in education. I loved the field of education. I think it's a huge kind of lever for upward mobility, but I loved the idea of being a businesswoman. I may get judged for this, but I'm going to continue to lead with authenticity. One of the very first exposures I had into the world of business was, you know, through a little reality TV competition show called The Apprentice. And again, if somebody wants to support me in the chat and say they also used to watch The Apprentice, again, we're being honest. I thought this was a safe space.
It is. Wait, you were
I'm sorry.
You
are you coming at me for watching that show?
No, I was asking, were you on it or?
Oh, girl, I've never watched. I'm talking about just exposure. I'm talking about exposure in terms of just like watching. Yeah, no, not at all. Me and Omarosa, could you imagine? No. But no, I think it was just one of those experiences. First of all, growing up, there weren't a lot of reality TV shows out there, let alone like competition shows. But watching The Apprentice was really interesting for me because I think it showed really for the first time on screen how individuals were given like business scenarios and watching how different teams, different individuals tackled it with one kind of shared goal. People went about it in very different ways. So it was insight into one, what are some topics that businesses are really thinking about? How are individuals working through problem solving and being innovative to come up, you know, with an outcome? But then it also gave insight into human behavior, which I think is very interesting. There's something about like psychology that I've always been interested in as well. And so fast forward, I went to Cornell University, studied organizational behavior and human resources while in college, and then got my first corporate internship on Wall Street working in diversity recruiting. And that's where I started my career as an HR professional. So it felt like a really kind of symbiotic relationship for me in being in the business world, but also using my kind of experience, skill set in the business world to also try to drive change organizationally to make sure that those workplaces were, one, recruiting diverse talent, but also set up in a way that was fostering a sense of belonging for them when they were there and had an infrastructure in place to support, develop, retain people. And so I felt like I was getting the best of both worlds and choosing that career path.
Yeah. I remember when I went into my first career, and it kind of like connects back to something that you said the other day. Like we talked about this before we came live, just the difference between happiness and fulfillment. And I think when we get our first job, we're making the money, we're doing the thing we wanted to do. Like we have a partner, we have all these things, and we're like, yeah, like I'm happy. But you and I talked a little bit about how happiness and fulfillment are different things. And as I'm about to actually read like a couple of lines from a status that you wrote the other day, and as I'm doing that, would love to hear from those in the chat what the difference between happiness and fulfillment is to you. So let me go ahead and try to pull that up. So you said, for a long time, I fulfillment with happiness. For me, this included going on vacations, spending time with family and friends, and having a well-paying job to support this lifestyle. Despite all these things, I experienced repeated moments turning into seasons where I felt incomplete, grappling with overbearing questions. Is my work valuable? Is this how I really want to spend my time? And am I truly satisfied with my life? So we'd love to hear from anyone in the chat, the difference between the two. And then Dria is going to talk a little bit about the difference between happiness and fulfillment, because as you and I have continued to have conversations about, they are two different things.
Absolutely. So I think in setting the stage for this, a lot of these questions are very personal. I think it's based on your perspective and how you choose to think through things. So even as I prepare to share the way that I think about fulfillment, I will venture to say that it is not kind of a one size fits all approach to how people choose to define things. I'm just pausing to see. I see someone jumped in the chat, Leandra. Happiness feels like a right now thing. Fulfillment feels more long term. The forever vibe I am looking for. Happiness feels more fleeting or temporary. I think one can be fulfilled on days they don't feel super happy. I love that, Leandra. It actually is very closely aligned to how Crystle and I talked about it. So if someone were to ask me, am I happy? I think I could answer that question without much thought. And even though there have been periods in my life where I could absolutely say that I was not fulfilled, it is hard for me to identify specific points in my life that I have not been happy. And this again is not to say that like I've lived a great life. There's never been times where I've been unhappy, but typically, even in the moments where I was the most unfulfilled in my professional and personal life, if someone asked if I was happy, my answer would have been yes, like quite honestly. So the same way that Leandra said, I think that you could be fulfilled, but also like not super happy. I also think the reverse could be true, where you could be happy. I could be on vacations. I could be spending time with family and friends, but there's still something deeper at play where even though I'm doing these things, even though I've got this great job that affords me the opportunity to do these things, there's still something that is a little untenable about my situation, right? And that's where I felt like there were repeated moments where I kept feeling not just discomfort, but also almost like unsettling discomfort in the fact that I could not continue to go about this style of living because I felt like I was continuing to find myself in cycles of burnout, quite honestly. So you could take vacations to escape burnout. You could be happy when you're on vacation. You could be happy planning and preparing for a vacation. But when you get back and you're living your daily routine, you might not be distraught. You might not be mentally like unstable, but are you fulfilled with how your daily routine is set up? And that's where I think fulfillment is a little bit deeper. And I can talk a little bit more about like how I define it, but that's also how I would say I do think happiness is more of a point of time moment. And I think fulfillment is a little bit longer term, like almost a state of contentment and peace with how you're choosing to live your life day in and day out.
Yeah. I remember, like everyone else, 2020. And I felt before that, I felt happy with my job in DEI. I've been in DEI for a decade. And before that, I felt happy. I felt like I was doing the things that I wanted to do. I felt like I was supporting people, etc. 2020 came and everything just accelerated. Like, girl, solve anti-Blackness and solve racism tomorrow. And everything was just ramped up, just so high that I experienced a level of burnout that I have never experienced in my life, not even since that time. And I remember feeling so unfulfilled and so angry. It was like, I have all the things that I need. Like, I have a home, I have, the spouse, I have all the things that society tells you that you should have, like, and be happy with it. But I just was not fulfilled. I just woke up every morning like, what am I doing with my life? Like, this is not fulfilling to me. I don't feel like I'm doing the things that I want to do. I feel stagnant. Like, those were the ways that I was feeling when I felt unfulfilled. And it is a very uncomfortable feeling, because it's almost like it's a cloud over you. And you can have moments of joy and happiness, sure. But ultimately, I just felt terrible.
Mm-hmm.
The worst.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting things here is that we continue to use the word discomfort, but discomfort has varying stages, right? Like, you could be experiencing discomfort at a kind of scale of like 1 to 4, which might be minimal and you're able to push through. You might also be experiencing discomfort at like a 9, 10, which sometimes gets closer to verge of burnout, where it becomes debilitating. Yeah. Right? Like, you might still be able to go through the motions of your job, but if you and your mental know that you're operating not at your full potential, like, there's something that's just like constantly weighing on you to the point where you might be able to perform just fine at work, but in your personal relationships, are you showing up not just as your best self, but like almost you don't recognize yourself?
Yes.
That part. Where, and it's so funny because I actually was on a call yesterday. There's a woman by the name of Modupe Akinola, who is a former Bainey. She is now a Columbia Business School professor, but she does a lot of research on stress, and she teaches Columbia Business School students about stress. And one of the things that she talked about was this misconception that we have in society that all stress is bad. That's not the case. If you're somebody like me, I know that I got through my college years because I operated very well under stress. I was the one in the library, like, I'm a bit of a procrastinator, but I will bang out a paper when I know that it's due within 24 hours. You could judge somebody like that, but I mean, honestly, it's even if you're an athlete, right? Like, sometimes the stress or like the anxiety of getting on the court causes you to perform maybe even at your highest than if it was just all good. And so the distinction that was made even in that session is there's something called acute stress, and then there's something called chronic stress. And the chronic stress, that's when it leads more into a debilitating state that is unhealthy. Acute stress, we all deal with it. Like, almost we're wired, like, psychologically to respond to stress. It's almost like something in psychology called a stress response. If a lion is chasing you, trust me, you're going to feel stressed, and that stress is going to cause you to run like hell. Yeah. And that's good. You don't need to not be stressed in those types of situations. If your house is on fire, you need to be stressed. That's going to elicit stress. So there are certain feelings that as human beings are innate. We are going to go through the range of emotions. That's just the way that we were born. That's the way that we're wired. So it's okay to have moments when you're not feeling happy, moments when you might be feeling angry, but there's something about being able to still make a choice as to whether you sit in that mindset because sometimes if you're unhappy, that can then lead to depression, right? Like it's okay to have a moment where you may be unhappy about something, but if you're not taking action to change that, then that's when the issue comes at play. So similar to what we're talking about now, you might have moments where physiologically your body's telling you like, I'm doing all the things that society might say, check, you did it, girl, you made it. But there's something innate in my body physiologically where I don't feel whole. I'm not like in rhythm with something deeper that I maybe can't pinpoint, but it's causing me to now feel emotionally exhausted, drained sometimes, not able to really understand why. But I think that's where, again, it's the lack of contentment or peace of mind in the way that you're choosing to, like Vanessa said in the chat, just go through life, letting life happen to you, as opposed to being deliberate about the way that, you are setting decisions and choices about how you want to live your life.
Yeah. A lot of thoughts came up for me. A whole lot of thoughts came up for me. And I shared, I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, that the times that things have really changed and transformed in my life have really been connected to these moments of acknowledging that there is a problem. So having some self-awareness. And then, as you mentioned, taking the action that needs to be taken to address it. I think it's Brian who asked in the chat, how did you manage through that? How did you manage through the situations that you were experiencing? And you and I talked a lot about taking responsibility, because you have to take responsibility for you. And I think someone else mentioned as well, like happiness is connected to external circumstances earlier in the conversation, and fulfillment is internal, like it is an inside job. So can you talk a little bit about like, how did you work through getting from this point where you were feeling unfulfilled to now walking fulfillment and supporting other people to get there too?
Sure. So just to kind of set the stage, I love to think about things like formally, like by definition. And so if you look up the definition of fulfillment, you'll see a few different definitions, but one that I want to just highlight for you is from Oxford Dictionary. And if you look at the very first definition for fulfillment, there are three kind of sub-bullets. The first is satisfaction or happiness as a result of fully developing one's abilities or character. 2, the achievement of something desired, promised, or predicted. And 3, the meeting of a requirement or condition. So when I think about those three definitions, they all give me very different things. So the first, satisfaction or happiness, is very similar to how I thought originally about fulfillment, right? Like as a feeling. But the clause that's critical here is as a result of fully developing one's abilities or character. So a lot of the work that I did to reclaim my fulfillment started off with identifying what was the identity that I wanted to have. If someone were to ask me, who am I? Just like how we started off this conversation, what would I be proud of as the response? And I think for a long time, I struggled to really answer that question without linking it to my profession. And for some people, it's fine. Like, of course, you can have the identity as a corporate executive, and that is pretty dope. For me, if I'm being honest, I was a little insecure about that being my identity because I felt like I didn't have much that I was choosing to do day in, day out aside from work. I know you mentioned even at the start of this conversation, like once you get your first job, it's like you have your first job, you have a partner, this and that. I have never been married, never been engaged. I've always been a single woman who's really been pretty focused on her career. Not to say that I haven't been interested in partnership, but if I think about the way that I choose to move day in, day out, work has been my priority. I've always, anybody who knows me knows I intimately love my family. But if you were to ask me, was I showing up the way that I always wanted to in my relationships with my family members? The answer was no. My family knew me to be a workaholic. And it's like, oh, Dria's a little impatient. That's because she got a lot going on at work. And it was like, how do I have all this patience for these other people at my job who could care less about me, but yet I'm so depleted that I don't have the energy to give to the people who care the most about me, my well-being, brought me into this world. Like, make it make sense. And so a lot of the work that I actually did up front was really choosing to think about what would it look like if somebody were to ask me, Dria, like, what are your hobbies? What are you passionate about? And quite honestly, like, if people were to ask me that question before, I would flounder. I didn't feel like I had any hobbies. I didn't know what my passions were.
Yeah.
Pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, that's when people started to really like, oh, I'm able to go out for walks. Now, if you ask me, I love walking and walking outdoors. Okay. Like, I love Peloton. When I was in a building that had a Peloton, I don't have a bike now. That's very expensive, but it's like, those were some of the hobbies that I was picking up. And those were things that I could actually almost put on a who am I page. When people would ask, like, not post-pandemic, in the pandemic, it's like, okay, well, now we're on Zoom, let's like have these icebreakers where people talk about what are they doing. It's like, oh, wow, I get to say, I do this, I do that outside of work. But it goes a little bit deeper than that. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But I think the very first thing that I had to think about is, what did I want my identity to be? The second definition on fulfillment talks about the achievement of something desired, promised, or predicted. And what I would say here stands out to me is the achievement of something. And to achieve something, you have to have a goal, right? It has to mark some type of completion. And so the other really big thing that I did in my journey to reclaim my fulfillment was be very intentional about goal setting. And it wasn't enough just to say things like, oh, I want to be a better version of myself in my relationships with my family. Or rather than prioritizing work, I want to prioritize my, physical health, or I want to lose weight. Mm-hmm. The goal is more so, okay, I am going to commit to going outside on walks for 30 minutes a day. Just 30 minutes. Get outside the house, Dria. I don't know about y'all, but I was the healthiest I've ever been during the pandemic. I look at pictures and I'm like, were you struggling? I mean, pandemic gives like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, I was thriving in the pandemic, taking calls outside. And during that time, I really learned a lot about what we call habit stacking, which is, how do you take different goals, right? Like during the pandemic, I was in DC, away from my family. But one of them was, I want to show up for my family, best self. That meant calling them. And I set a goal. I want to call them every day, talk to my mom for probably 30 minutes to an hour, talk to my dad at least for maybe 15 minutes. I don't know if he's watching, but it was like, okay, well, if you have the goal of walking and also talking to your family, why not do that at the same time? Like, it doesn't have to be stressful. Like, oh, I need to find time to do this. I need to find time to do that. You can merge them. And that's what we call habit stacking. So that was just another thing that I started to do as I was setting goals, figuring out how you could maybe truncate things and accomplish, like, kill two birds with one stone. And the third thing in the definition of fulfillment was the meeting of a requirement or condition. So I started to ask myself, do you feel obligated to just do certain things? because a requirement or condition to me sounds like, oh, you just have to do this. That's like if you fulfill, the requirements for, I don't know, like passing some type of test that, I don't know, a driver's license, maybe. It's like you have to fulfill a certain number of hours in driver's ed. That's just like, okay, I'm obligated to do this. I really care about the outcome. But again, even though I'm obligated to do this, I'm not upset about it because it's going to yield to the output that I want. If I feel obligated to be working in corporate DEI just because it's a career choice that I've now invested 10 years in, but I don't really want to continue to grow in the corporate ladder and be like a chief diversity officer, which is the next step. Like, do I just feel obligated to do this now? Or the other way that you could think about it, instead of it being an obligation, is a commitment. And so the other thing that I did was, you can set goals, you can think about your identity, but like, what are some of the things that I want to also commit to that I feel good in terms of like, I'm meeting this commitment? And that comes a little bit to like the consistency, the convictions that you have in terms of what you choose to commit to. So all that to say, I think the biggest things that I thought a lot about were my identity, in that I thought about, my unique gifts and talents, the personality traits that I wanted to be known for. What did I think it would look like to kind of be my best self? And then really trying to action that with goals and commitments. And one of the things that I really talk to my clients about now is, once you do the work of identifying the identity that you would feel proud of, you need to then embrace the 5 C's. And so the 5 C's for me are: 1, clarity. So continuing to be clear about the things that you desire in terms of, who am I? How do I want to show up? How do I want to live my life? What are the goals, dreams, aspirations that I will feel proud of? Committing to those, right? So being very specific and actionable with them. 3, being very consistent. 4, communicating them. So aside from me just doing all this self-work, the big unlock was when I started to talk to people about this. So I actually sought professional help when I started to feel unfulfilled, and this like repeated cycle. I started therapy. I got an executive coach, and I also got a wellness coach. It was like, listen, I'm making this money. Let me invest in the things that might help to propel me forward. It was almost like when I got an Apple Watch. At first, I was like, I don't need to spend this money on an Apple Watch. I don't need to be making calls from it. But when I got that Apple Watch, I was like, this was such a good investment, because it almost takes a lot of the thinking off of my mind. I literally have this tool that's helping to propel me in the goals that I desire, in terms of like how often I'm walking, the nudges for like standing up. You could have different apps like drink water. So to have that external accountability was critical for me. So I had that through, professionals, but then also communicating that to my tribe. And those were the people that love and care about me, like my friends, my family members. And so those are the 5 C's that I think really helped me to reclaim my fulfillment. So clarity, commitment, consistency, communication, and then community.
I love it. As you were talking, all I could think about was ease. When you talked about the Apple Watch, that was a really good comparison. Because ease is so important in this work to getting to fulfillment, because you got to focus on yourself. You got to prioritize yourself. You got to ask yourself all these questions about, what is it that you really want? Who am I? And that gets you to a place of ease. I know it doesn't start there, because once you recognize that there is an issue and something that you need to address, we're told that being wrong is bad. Like if you're not happy, if you're not feeling good, and like you said, the stress is bad. It's like, no, once you get to the point where you're like, okay, I see what's happening here. And now I can actually address it and get to a point where I feel fulfilled. You also, when you were talking about the things that you wanted to do different, like the things you wanted to commit to, that made me think about this year, because this year I dubbed it my year of liberation. And so many things have happened this year that I wouldn't have expected. The universe snatched people out of my life that I wouldn't have imagined would be gone. But it's like you make that decision to say, I want this to be my, or Crystle, you made that decision to say you want this to be your year of liberation. You serious about it. So we about to see how serious you are, girl.
Wow. That's
It's
deep.
been a really wild ride, but in prioritizing myself and finding the things that I care about and want to do, like there's one thing that I am about to learn that one of my friends keeps holding me very much accountable to, is learning to swim.
Aww.
Because I'm so terrified of the water. I almost drowned when I was younger. Like one of my friends took me on the deep end, girl. I was like, I can't swim. Are you going to save me? And she didn't. And I pulled her braids.
Not took her under.
I took her under, girl. She won't save me.
We could never go swimming together. As much as I love it, that's like, oh my gosh, drowning? Like,
yeah, I am, but I'm gonna learn how to swim. But that's like another thing that I've committed to say, this is something that I want. It's something that I'm terrified of, that I'm very much fearful of, but I want to grow and I want to liberate myself from this fear.
Yes. Marcus said, not her braids. I agree.
I can save myself.
Not the braids. And if you got, like, if she couldn't see you doing it, oh, it's the worst. But I can, that resonates with me, especially when you said, like, the universe has a way of, like, snatching people out of your life. And so there are two things here. First off, we know that sometimes the things that you desire may not be the best for you. I posted this quote, I think within the last month. Sometimes God destroys your plans so that your plans don't destroy you.
Oh, that's good. Come on, Marvin Sapp.
Listen, I said, okay, speak to me. So that resonates. But also, we have to know there are experiences where, you know, folks may leave and it's not, you know, death happens. I was trying to figure out a way to, like, massage this. But sometimes people can be snatched from you. And my friends who know me also know the brevity of life is something that I constantly think about. And it's something that I think I used to be a little hesitant to talk about openly, because a lot of people are like, that's very morbid. But I do think that a lot of choices that I make are driven off of that, like, way of thinking. And even when we talk about this concept of fulfillment, there was a nagging feeling that I had about the idea of the people that I care most about, like my parents, never seeing me fully maximize my potential or live out my deepest dreams. And I think for me, I had to reconcile the idea of maybe risking failure. And there's a quote that I love. I heard it on Oprah's Sunday Soul podcast. It was from Wes Moore. And he said, I'd rather risk failure than risk never dancing with joy. And if I think about my parents, I'm like, if there is any time that I would want to dream big or dare to do the things that scare me the most, I'd much rather do it while they're here on this earth, because I know that they are by far my biggest earthly cheerleaders ever. And so even if I fail, the idea of having those people that I love and care about be here to support me, I feel like I can do anything, quite honestly. And my dad has always told me in my personal relationships, for the most part, don't settle. And it's something that I've definitely taken to heart. And a lot of the relationships that I'm in, certain men will say, like, I can tell that you're independent. Like, you don't really need partnership. And sometimes I would find that to be, you know, like a little off-putting, because it's like, okay, are you saying that I'm abrasive, or like I come off as not wanting to have a soft life? Like I don't need a man? Because trust me, that's not the case. But I think there's something about a confidence that I bring into my personal relationships, probably with people of the opposite sex, probably largely because my dad has poured into me. And I know how it feels to have like a manly figure, someone that cares about you. And I don't necessarily need to get that like from just a partner. While I desire it, I'm not going to settle for certain things. And I had to think about those aspects of myself that I love, that appear in my personal life, and like, how could I translate that into my professional life? Like, I am known to press that stop button and get out of relationships. I don't spend a whole lot of time sometimes, right? And it's like, when it came to work, it's like, oh, I'm yes, ma'am. It's hard for me to say no. I'm a people pleaser. And I felt like I did that at the detriment of myself. And again, you have to be honest with yourself. Like, a part of me definitely also has gotten this far in my career because I do care about the opinions of other people. I want to be a top performer, a good performer, because I want people to, I almost want to prove myself to people. And so again, when we talk about stress, right? Like, there's certain things that on the surface that might not sound great, but it's like, I know that is what helps me. With a wellness coach, like a trainer, sometimes having somebody who holds you accountable, that it's like, I don't want to tell her that I didn't work out for 3 days this week. So, you know, like, you need to know yourself. But for me professionally, it was like, I also don't want to get so caught up in serving others and putting their oxygen mask on before myself. And there's another thing that I learned while going through executive coaching, which was, you can consider yourself a people pleaser. You can say that you find it hard to say no. But at the end of the day, throughout your life, you are always choosing to say no to someone.
Yeah.
It's a choice of whether you're saying no to them or to you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. That's so real. That's so real. And on the part one about investing in yourself. So you talked about the wellness coach, the executive coach, the therapist. I'm actually in this group called the Exodus Summit, and you may have heard of it, but it's like a group of Black women who are exiting the US. Like, they are taking off and doing their own thing. And to the point about death and about investing in yourself, there was a live over the weekend, and Stephanie Perry, who's one of the co-founders of the Exodus Summit, she said something like, or her mom said this, because her mom used to be a chaplain in a hospital. And she said something like, the most expensive thing that this person will ever invest in is their funeral. That hit me so hard, because we are quick to be like, well, no, I don't need that. Like, I don't need to invest in this. I don't need to do this. I don't need to do that. I can wait. And then the thing that you invest most in is your funeral.
Yep.
Yeah. That was hard to hear.
Right. There's another one. Either you choose to take care of your wellness or like your illness. Mm-hmm. Right. So even when we think about the title of this series, It's all about the way that you choose to set boundaries, to
and
go
you
through
must
life,
choose
right?
you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Every time. Choose you, y'all. Choose you.
I love the engagement in the chat. People are dropping some gems.
Same.
You only live once. That is so true. YOLO.
Yeah, we live every day. I'm like, whoa, you only die once. We live every day.
Hello.
Good, Marcus.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this conversation. And I feel like it's probably a bunch of people that are in the chat, whether they are live or whether they're watching the replay, who want to know how they can work with you and how they can get in touch with you. So tell the people, Dria, how can they work with you?
So how can you work with me? So like I mentioned at the start, there are 3 things that I'm doing now. I am an HR DEI consultant. The second thing that I do is leadership coaching. And right now that's on a 1-to-1 basis, but I am going to start doing group coaching. And the population that I really focus on are change agents. So I spend a lot of time with other DEI professionals, other HR professionals, because that's where I have my expertise and experience in, but helping them to think through real life situations. The landscape in DEI is ever changing, but then also helping to equip them in thinking about some of the topics that we talked about. I have a kind of module called Shifting from Surviving to Thriving. I'm also a believer. I don't love the idea of resiliency. I saw that you posted about that. But it is, again, like a buzzword. We talk about maintaining resilience. So, but I want to get people to thriving. It goes a little bit beyond just resilience. And then the third thing that I do is I'm building a community of change agents, primarily Black professionals who are focused in diversity. So that goes beyond just DEI practitioners. I want to start with DEI practitioners, but also people that are advancing DEI in whatever their profession is. And so the way that you can contact me, I have a website, www.blackindiversity.com. You can go on the website and learn a little bit more about my backstory, but then also learn a little bit more about my coaching offerings, my consulting offerings, and then also subscribe to that community. As part of the community, we're continuing to build it out. It's very US specific right now, but the intent is to really start to host more forums, both in person and virtual, for people to come together. While I was in DEI, I would have loved to have more of a support system where it didn't feel like I was operating so much on an island, or that I needed to like take a step back from my corporate career in order to reclaim fulfillment. I was looking for a bit more of a sustainable, kind of scalable support system. And I have to say, there's a very core group of DEI friends that I have that really were all the difference for me. 5 to 6 women that I connected with throughout the course of, my career. But I realized that not everyone has access to that, nor is it very scalable. So also, if you want to just subscribe to be on the mailing list for some of those forums and networking opportunities, you can do that also on the website. And you can follow me on Instagram, Black in Diversity, as well as my personal page, which is Drizzy Dree. But you'll be better off going to Black in Diversity, because Drizzy Dree has a few extra Z's, thanks to one of my friends who first created it for me.
I love it. Well, I'm following you on Drizzy Dree.
Oh, goodness. Well, yeah, it's just Drizzy, like Drake Drizzy, but with 3 Z's. DRI.
I love it. This was such a good conversation, and Brian said it best. This was the best webinar ever.
Oh, Brian. Oh, that's so sweet. I feel like we're going to have to connect. You have to reach out, whether it's Instagram, LinkedIn, the website. Brian, that was nice. I'd love to learn a little bit more about.
Yeah, and Marcus is going to follow you too. Okay.
Let's go. And please follow Design Your Soft Life Crystle, before we end, I just want to give you your flowers. I want to thank you for creating these spaces. This series is awesome. I've had the pleasure of tapping into them after you asked me to be a guest. And there's just so much richness in these conversations. So if this is your first webinar, I would encourage you to go and look at Crystle's playlist, A Black Women's Guide to Liberation. The speakers are phenomenal. The discussions are great. But Crystle, I first learned about you through LinkedIn. During my self-discovery phase, one of the very intentional things that I did was be very thoughtful about people that I was following, messages that I wanted to receive. I think so often, sometimes there's a narrative out there about, stress and being a Black woman and things are so hard, glass ceiling, this, that, and the other. And while those things are true, I also had a desire to get more positive and proactive information about how to change things from the inside out, not from the outside in. And I saw your content. I had to follow you. And just to see that not only are you focused on this population that I care about deeply, Black women, and talking about topics like self-care, but you're a fellow DEI professional. I was like, I am so proud of this woman who is doing her thing. And that's when I just sent you a DM just to say I was just so proud of you and your work. There's such a demand here. And I see it after now, starting and founding Black in Diversity. There's such a need. Sign up for her retreats. But I just want to thank you. You're doing such an amazing job balancing things. I know sometimes it's hard. This whole founder entrepreneur path is not easy, but you are doing a phenomenal job. And I hope that you just can recognize, even from this chat, just how enriching creating a setting in a space like this is for us.
Dria, I love you, girl. This is like
you.
Like this is real sisterhood. I'm over here like, but I appreciate you so much. I appreciate you so much. And I'm gonna keep going because when I initially started this series, I didn't know if I wanted to keep it. I think I shared this story maybe on a different live. I was like, it's just gonna be 30 minutes. I only want to commit to 30 minutes. Maybe people won't resonate with this topic. But over time and having all of these conversations with so many brilliant Black women like yourself, I have become more comfortable having these conversations and realized just how important they are. So much gratitude for you or to you for being here and also for giving me flowers in this moment because I'm a perfectionist too.
Mm-hmm.
Overachiever.
Oh, I know. I know. I see it.
Yeah. So it is reminders like yours and like those of the folks in the chat that help me to keep going every day. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So if anyone else is wondering what's coming up next. So next week we are talking to Natasha Wade, and we're going to be talking about balance as liberation. And Dria, you also mentioned the resilience topic.
Yes.
That is actually going to be my first in real life. We Ain't Dying for This in Atlanta. It's happening on June 22nd. It's going to be at the Healing While Building Summit. And I'm going to be chatting with Lauren DK, and we're going to be talking about redefining resilience because we know resilience ain't what it is. Like we need to change the way we're thinking about it. So our whole conversation is going to be about redefining resilience as liberation. I'm really looking forward to that. If you're interested in joining and you're in Atlanta, please visit Healing While Building Summit.com. And if you use my code WADFT, so We Ain't Dying for This, you'll get 50% off your ticket. So send me a message. If anyone needs anything, reach out. I am here. Would love to hear from you. And if you're still listening, share this live with a Black woman that you think might benefit from the conversation that we had tonight. And we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.